They were the galaxy's most lethal predators, bred for war and stripped of mercy. When the humans stepped into the arena, the commanders expected a massacre. Instead, the pack broke formation. The towering, bloodthirsty cubs didn't attack. They rushed to her, kneeling in the dust. The universe held its breath. The transport shuttle, a modified Lockheed Boeing heavy lifter, shuddered as it broke through the dense, copper-tinted atmosphere of Aegis Prime. Inside the troop bay, Specialist Kendra Hayes checked the seals on her environmental suit for the third time. She was the only human on board, surrounded by crates of DARPA-engineered field rations and heavy plasteel munitions. The shaking didn't bother her. It was the suffocating weight of the assignment that made her chest tight. Kendra was a xenopsychologist and a former combat medic for the Coalition Marine Corps. She had seen action in the Outer Rim, stitched up plasma burns under heavy fire, and negotiated with species that communicated entirely through bioluminescent radiation. But nothing in her dossier could truly prepare her for Camp Bastion. Aegis Prime was the homeworld of the Valerians. To the rest of the civilized galaxy, they were known simply as the Hounds. They were a bipedal apex predator species, massive wolf-like creatures with dense musculature, retractable adamantine claws, and a culture built entirely around warfare and dominance. Humanity, the newest and physically weakest species in the Galactic Coalition, had recently signed a mutual defense pact with them. As part of the treaty, an exchange program was initiated. Humans would observe Valerian training, and Valerians would learn human tactical strategies. When the shuttle ramp finally lowered, the heat of the planet hit Kendra like a physical blow, carrying the sharp scent of ozone, iron, and dry red dust. Waiting for her on the landing pad was General Bradley, a grizzled human veteran whose face looked like it had been carved from weathered sandstone. "Specialist Hayes," Bradley barked over the roar of the atmospheric scrubbers. He didn't offer a hand to shake. "I read your file. 2 tours in the Orion sector. Commendations for field triage. But let me make one thing crystal clear right now. Your background means absolutely nothing here." Kendra hoisted her heavy duffel bag over her shoulder, meeting his gaze evenly. "I'm here to observe and integrate, General. Nothing more. You're here because the politicians back on Earth think we can play nice with a species that eats its own dead," Bradley scoffed, turning on his heel. "Follow me. Keep your head down. Do not make sudden movements. And whatever you do, do not look the Alpha instructors in the eyes." As they walked through the sprawling, brutalist architecture of Camp Bastion, Kendra observed the Valerians. Even the lowest-ranking soldiers towered over her, standing easily at 7 feet tall. Their fur was thick, ranging from charcoal black to mottled grey, and their eyes burned with an unsettling predatory intelligence. "This facility," Bradley explained as they approached a massive outdoor arena enclosed by electrified hypersteel fencing, "is where they train their youth. The Valerians call them cubs, but don't let the term fool you. By the time they are 3 Earth years old, they weigh 300 pounds and can rip a titanium bulkhead apart with their bare hands." Kendra stood at the observation deck overlooking a sprawling muddy pit littered with barbed wire, trench lines, and live-fire automated turrets. Below them, a group of about 30 Valerian cubs was being put through a grueling physical conditioning exercise. They were hauling immense concrete blocks on their backs, crawling through the thick red mud while automated drones fired low-yield plasma rounds over their heads. Standing in the center of the mud pit was the lead instructor. He was an absolute behemoth of a Valerian, easily 8.5 feet tall, bearing a lattice of jagged scars across his snout. "That's Victor," Bradley said, his voice dropping in volume. "He is the alpha of this training pack. He doesn't believe in tactics. He believes in culling. To him, weakness is a disease that must be purged from the gene pool before they ever see a real battlefield." Kendra watched as one of the cubs, a slightly smaller, leaner adolescent with silver-tipped fur, stumbled under the weight of his concrete block. The cub fell, his muzzle burying into the corrosive mud. Before he could scramble back to his feet, Victor was there. The alpha didn't offer a hand. Instead, Victor planted a massive clawed foot on the cub's back, pressing him deeper into the muck, roaring a command in the harsh, guttural Valyrian tongue. The other cubs paused, their ears flattening against their skulls. They wanted to help. Kendra could see it in the micro-expressions of their faces, in the subtle twitch of their tails, but the sheer terror of Victor's dominance kept them frozen. "Survival of the fittest," Bradley muttered, leaning against the railing. "It's how they've operated for 10,000 years. Victor is teaching them that the pack is only as strong as its strongest link, and the weak must be left behind." "That goes against every pack-bonding instinct in mammalian biology," Kendra said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "True pack predators take care of their injured. They protect their young. This isn't training, General. This is systematic abuse. He's not building a cohesive unit, he's building sociopaths." Bradley shot her a warning glare. "Watch your mouth, Specialist. We are guests here. We do not interfere with their culture. You take your notes, you write your reports for the brass at the United Nations Space Command, and you stay out of the way. Understood?" Kendra didn't answer immediately. She watched the silver-tipped cub finally manage to push himself up, shivering, his fur matted with blood and mud. She noticed two other cubs hovering nearby, one with deep brown fur and a missing left ear, and another with striking mismatched eyes. They bumped shoulders with the injured cub, a fleeting, almost invisible gesture of solidarity, before Victor roared again, forcing them to run. Kendra checked her datapad, pulling up the assigned human translation files for the current cohort. The silver-tipped cub was designated as Mason. The brown-furred one was Finn. The one with mismatched eyes was Leo. "I understand, General," Kendra lied softly, her eyes locked on the cubs below. She had been sent here to evaluate, to observe. But as she watched the brutalization of creatures that were, at their core, just children forced into a meat grinder, a deep, uniquely human instinct began to awaken in her chest. 3 weeks into the observation cycle, the tension at Camp Bastion had reached a boiling point. The attrition rate in Victor's training camp was staggering. Cubs were being dragged out of the arena on a daily basis, suffering from broken limbs, severe plasma burns, and deep psychological trauma. Kendra spent her days on the catwalks compiling reams of data. Her reports back to Earth were scathing. She detailed how the Valyrian military doctrine was fundamentally flawed. By relying entirely on fear and pain, Victor was fracturing the innate pack bond of the youth. A true military unit relied on trust, the absolute certainty that the soldier next to you had your back. Victor was teaching the cubs that the soldier next to them was a potential liability, a competitor for survival. Despite Bradley's strict orders to remain an invisible observer, Kendra had started making small, quiet moves. During the brief mandatory rest periods, she would position herself near the reinforced mesh fencing of the holding pens. She never spoke to the cubs. That would be a direct violation of protocol, but she made sure they saw her, unlike the other human observers who flinched when the massive beast slammed into the fences. Kendra stood her ground. When Mason, the undersized silver-tipped cub, sat near the fence shivering from exhaustion, Kendra sat on the other side. She didn't stare with pity. She simply projected calm, steady energy. She left small, high-calorie DARPA ration bars hidden in the crevices of the feeding troughs. She knew Finn, the observant brown-furred cub, had seen her do it. He had shared the rations with Mason and Leo in the dead of night. The true test of the camp, an exercise known simply as the Crucible, arrived on a sweltering Tuesday. The Crucible was a brutal 3-mile obstacle course designed to simulate a catastrophic frontline retreat. The arena was flooded with waist-deep mud, tangled with razor wire that carried a lethal electrical charge, and bombarded by overhead artillery simulators. The objective was simple: cross the finish line within 20 minutes. Any cub left behind when the timer hit 0 would be expelled from the military academy, cast out into the lower castes of Valyrian society, a fate worse than death in their culture. Kendra stood alongside General Bradley and several high-ranking Valyrian commanders on the secure command deck. Down below, the heavy blast doors hissed open, and the pack of 30 cubs surged into the mud, driven by the deafening cracks of Victor's electro-whip. The noise was deafening. Artillery simulators pounded the earth, throwing massive geysers of red mud into the air. The cubs, panting heavily, threw themselves at the obstacles. They scrambled over slick plasteel walls, diving through the electrified razor wire. Through her macro binoculars, Kendra tracked Mason, Finn, and Leo. They were sticking together, moving as a synchronized triad. Finn was leading, finding the path of least resistance through the wire. Leo was providing physical support, shoving the smaller cubs forward. Mason, despite his smaller stature, was quick, darting under obstacles that the larger cubs had to climb over. They were at the halfway mark when disaster struck. An overhead artillery simulator misfired. Instead of a blank concussive blast, a live structural support beam holding up a section of the mock ruins gave way. Tons of jagged plasteel and concrete crashed down directly into the path of the running pack. The cubs scattered, but Mason wasn't fast enough. A massive section of the support beam slammed into the mud, pinning Mason's lower legs beneath it. A sharp, terrified yelp pierced through the cacophony of the arena. Mason thrashed frantically, his claws tearing uselessly at the heavy plasteel. Immediately, Leo and Finn broke off from the main pack, skidding to a halt in the mud. They rushed to their fallen brother, their massive claws digging into the mud as they desperately tried to heave the beam off his legs, but it was too heavy. From the command deck, Kendra stepped forward, gripping the railing. "General, shut down the course. We have a structural collapse." General Bradley frowned, reaching for his comlink, but a heavy, clawed hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was Commander Vorath, the Valyrian base overseer. "The course remains active," Vorath rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "The crucible does not stop for misfortune. In war, buildings fall. If the weak cannot free themselves, they perish." "He's trapped," Kendra yelled, abandoning protocol. "He's a child. You're going to let him die out there?" Down in the arena, Victor approached the scene. The Alpha strode through the mud, unaffected by the chaos. He reached the trapped cub and the two others desperately trying to free him. Victor didn't offer assistance. Instead, he uncoiled his electro-whip, striking the ground with a blinding flash of blue energy. Victor roared at Leo and Finn, pointing his whip toward the finish line. "Leave him!" The command was clear even without a translator. "Leave the weak behind." Leo snarled, baring his teeth at the Alpha instructor, an act of supreme defiance. Victor didn't hesitate. He backhanded the adolescent, sending the 300-pound cub flying into the mud. Finn whined, stepping back, torn between the deeply ingrained terror of the Alpha and the desperate urge to save his packmate. "Leave him!" Victor's booming voice finally translated through the facility's speakers. "The pack moves forward. The dead are dead." Under the beam, Mason stopped struggling. He let out a low, mournful keen, laying his head in the mud. He was giving up. He was accepting his fate. On the observation deck, something inside Kendra snapped. It was a primal, ancient instinct forged in the fires of humanity's own bloody history. 1,000,000 years of human evolution, of building tribes, of risking everything to pull a wounded comrade from the fire. Leave no one behind. It was the ethos that had allowed humanity to survive the darkness. "Specialist Hayes, step back from that console," Bradley ordered, sensing her shift in demeanor. Kendra didn't listen. She slammed her hand onto the emergency safety override panel. A loud klaxon wailed across the arena, but Commander Vorath instantly smashed his fist onto the secondary bypass, keeping the live fire course active. "Human," Vorath growled, baring his fangs. "Do not interfere with the right." Kendra locked eyes with the towering alien. "Go to hell!" Before anyone could stop her, Kendra unclipped her heavy observer's jacket, revealing the sleek, form-fitting DARPA exosuit beneath it. A mechanical harness designed to enhance human strength in zero-gravity loading bays. She bolted for the maintenance stairwell. "Hayes!" Bradley roared. "That is direct order! Stand down!" Kendra ignored him. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her boots clanging against the metal grating. She hit the ground level and sprinted toward the arena access doors. She punched in her override code, and the heavy pneumatic doors hissed open, welcoming her into the inferno. The heat of the arena washed over her, thick with the smell of scorched ozone and blood. She stepped into the ankle-deep mud, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was a squishy, fragile human, walking into a live fire zone filled with apex predators who were currently being driven into a frenzy by pain and fear. But she didn't stop walking. She broke into a run, her boots sinking into the muck, heading straight for the collapsed ruins. The sight of a human sprinting onto the active crucible course caused a ripple of confusion throughout the arena. The automated turrets, programmed to target the heat signatures of the massive Valerians, momentarily ignored the small, cold-suited human weaving through the razor wire. Up on the command deck, Commander Varath leaned over the railing, his eyes wide with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "What is the primate doing? She will be torn to shreds." "Hayes!" Bradley screamed into his comlink, but Kendra had already discarded her earpiece. Victor, standing over the defeated form of Mason, turned his massive head. The Alpha narrowed his eyes as the small human bounded over a concrete barrier and slid into the mud just a few feet away. Kendra didn't look at Victor. She ignored the 8-foot-tall killing machine entirely. She fell to her knees in the mud next to Mason. The cub's eyes were blown wide with shock. His breathing was shallow, his jaws parted in a silent gasp of pain. "I've got you," Kendra whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I'm right here, buddy, I've got you." She engaged the hydraulic servos on her DARPA exosuit. The harness hummed to life, emitting a low mechanical whine. She wedged her arms under the massive plasteel beam that was crushing Mason's legs. Victor let out a deafening roar of fury. This was a violation of the sacred rite. A weak, fragile alien was interfering with the culling. He raised his electro-whip, the crackling energy casting harsh blue shadows across his scarred face. "Human!" Victor bellowed, his voice echoing over the loudspeakers. "Step away from the carrion, or you will be purged with him!" Kendra locked her legs, her boots sinking deep into the mud. She looked up, her eyes burning with an intense, unyielding fire that made even the massive Alpha pause for a fraction of a second. "He is not carrion!" Kendra screamed back, her voice tearing from her throat. "He is your soldier, and we do not leave our own behind." With a guttural shout, Kendra activated the suit's maximum overdrive. The servos shrieked in protest, the metal joints popping as she strained against the immense weight. Slowly, agonizingly, the plasteel beam began to lift. Inch by inch, she forced it upward from the mud. "Finn! Leo!" Kendra yelled, her muscles burning, her vision swimming with black spots. "Pull him out, now!" The two cubs, who had been frozen in terror by Victor's presence, suddenly snapped out of their paralysis. The sheer audacity of this tiny, furless creature commanding them, taking on the burden of the pack, triggered something deep within their primitive brains. It wasn't the fear-based compliance they felt toward Victor. It was something older, something purer. It was the call of a true guardian. Leo darted forward, grabbing Mason by the scruff of his neck, while Finn shoved his massive shoulders under the beam next to Kendra, taking the brunt of the weight off the failing human exosuit. Together they heaved. With a sickening squelch of mud, Mason was dragged free. Kendra released the beam, collapsing backward into the muck, gasping for air. The exosuit hissed, venting hot steam. Victor was beside himself with rage. The natural order had been subverted. His authority had been completely undermined. His lips curled back, exposing a horrifying array of serrated fangs. He raised the electro-whip, ready to strike down the human interloper and the insubordinate cubs. "Kill the human!" Victor roared to the rest of the pack, who had stopped running and were now circling back, drawn by the commotion. "She has tainted the trial! Tear her apart!" 30 massive, heavily muscled adolescent predators turned their glowing eyes toward Kendra. They were bred for violence. They were conditioned to follow the Alpha's orders without question. They lowered their heads, baring their fangs, and began to charge. Up on the observation deck, General Bradley drew his sidearm. "God damn it, open the doors, get a strike team in there now," he yelled, but it was too late. The pack was closing the distance in seconds, their heavy footfalls shaking the earth. Kendra struggled to her feet. The mud made her boots heavy, and the overtaxed exosuit was sluggish. She stood over Mason, who was trying weakly to crawl away. She knew she couldn't fight them. She didn't have a weapon. She had only her fragile human body. But she didn't run. She didn't cower. Kendra squared her shoulders, spread her arms wide, and placed herself directly between the charging pack of 300-pound killers and the injured cub. She looked the oncoming tide of fur, claws, and teeth dead in the eyes. If I die, she thought, I die showing them what a real leader looks like. The pack closed in. 20 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards. Kendra braced for the agonizing impact of claws and teeth. But the impact never came. At the very last second, the lead cub, a massive black-furred brute named Rex, slammed his front claws into the mud, tearing up a huge wave of dirt as he forcibly arrested his momentum. The cubs behind him violently veered off to the left and the right, skidding and sliding to avoid trampling the human. Kendra opened her eyes, coughing through the cloud of red dust. What she saw sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of absolute awe. The pack hadn't attacked her. Instead, they had broken formation and encircled her. Rex stood directly in front of her, facing outward. Leo and Finn flanked her sides, shielding the injured Mason with their bodies. The rest of the 30 cubs formed a tight, impenetrable defensive perimeter around Kendra. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at Victor. A low collective growl began to vibrate through the air. It started as a rumble in the chests of the cubs and grew into a deafening, terrifying symphony of defiance. They bared their teeth, their hackles raised, their ears pinned flat. 30 pairs of glowing, predatory eyes locked onto the towering alpha. Victor took a step back, genuine shock registering on his scarred face. His whip hand dropped slightly. Up on the observation deck, silence fell over the commanders. Commander Vorath's jaw was slack. General Bradley slowly lowered his weapon, his eyes wide. "By the stars," Vorath whispered, his voice trembling. They are shielding her." "Why?" Bradley asked, completely bewildered. "She's not one of them. She challenged the Alpha." "No, General." An older, grey-furred Valyrian tactician spoke up from the back of the room, his eyes fixed on the muddy arena. "You do not understand our ancient biology. Before the modern era, before we militarized our entire culture, the Alpha was not the one who inflicted the most pain. The true Alpha, the Prime, was the one who was willing to die to protect the pack." Down in the mud, Kendra stood surrounded by a wall of muscle and fur. Rex, the largest of the cubs, briefly turned his head. He looked down at the tiny, exhausted human covered in mud. Slowly, deliberately, the massive apex predator lowered his head, pressing his cold, wet snout against Kendra's shoulder in a gesture of absolute submission and loyalty. He didn't see a fragile alien. He saw the only creature in the entire compound who was willing to fight for them. Victor roared, trying to reassert his dominance, taking a threatening step forward. "Stand down! You are Valyrians. You do not yield to prey." In response, the entire pack took one synchronized step forward. 30 chest-deep snarls echoed across the crucible. They were ready to tear their former tormentor apart to protect the human behind them. The cubs had broken from the old ways. The human had entered the training, and in doing so, she hadn't just saved a life, she had claimed the pack. The standoff in the suffocating heat of the crucible arena stretched into an agonizing eternity. The air, heavy with the metallic tang of vaporized copper and the primal scent of adrenaline, crackled with raw tension. Victor, the undisputed Alpha of Camp Bastion, stood paralyzed before the unthinkable. His regime of terror, meticulously cultivated through cycles of calculated brutality, had disintegrated in a matter of seconds. Facing him was not a scattering of terrified, submissive youths, but a unified phalanx of 30 juvenile apex predators. They were a wall of bristling fur, bared fangs, and rumbling chests, shielding the battered human xenopsychologist, Specialist Kendra Hayes. At the center of this protective ring, Kendra struggled to maintain her composure. Her muscles screamed in agony from the overexertion of the DARPA exosuit, the hydraulic fluid leaking down her arms like dark blood. She knelt beside Mason, the silver-tipped cub whose legs had been crushed beneath the fallen plasteel beam. Mason pressed his large, wet nose against Kendra's armoured shoulder, letting out a soft, chuffing sound. A Valerian expression of profound gratitude and submission. Rex, the monolithic black-furred brute who had spearheaded the mutiny, held the vanguard position. He did not break eye contact with Victor. "Step aside!" Victor bellowed, his voice echoing off the plasteel containment walls. He raised his electro-whip, the intense blue plasma casting chaotic shadows across the red mud. "You are breaking the first law of the ancestors. Step aside, or I will slaughter every last one of you mutinous runts." Rex did not flinch. Instead, the giant cub let out a deafening, earth-shattering roar. It was a sound that vibrated through the very bedrock of Aegis Prime. The rest of the pack instantly joined the chorus. It was not a chaotic noise, but a harmonized acoustic assault. An ancient Valerian war song that had not been heard in millennia. It was the song of the Prime Vanguard, a pack willing to die for their leader. Up on the observation deck, Commander Vorath's shock finally galvanized into action. The veteran Valerian overseer slammed his massive fist onto the master control console, bypassing the manual overrides that had kept the doors sealed. "Enough!" Vorath roared into the primary comms array, his voice booming over the arena's public address system. "The trial is suspended. Drop the containment fields." Massive electromagnetic barriers slammed down from the ceiling, slicing directly between Victor and the pack, emitting a harsh, glowing purple luminescence. Victor slammed his fists against the energy shield, his face contorted in blind fury. "Vorath!" Victor screamed, pointing a massive claw at the human. "The primate has corrupted the culling. She must be purged." "You have lost the pack, Victor," Vorath stated, his voice chillingly calm as he descended the steel stairs toward the arena floor, accompanied by a heavily armed detachment of base security. "A true commander leads. You merely terrorized. And when presented with a superior leadership paradigm, your soldiers made their choice. Relinquish your weapon and submit to the guards. You're relieved of your command, effective immediately." General Bradley, having sprinted down the stairs behind Vorath, rushed past the security detail and through the deactivated perimeter gate. He expected the pack to turn on him, but as he approached the mud-soaked circle, Rex merely cast a side glance at him, before stepping slightly aside, creating a narrow corridor for the human general to pass. They were allowing him access because he smelled like Kendra. "Hayes," Bradley gasped, sliding into the mud beside her. He activated his wristcom. "Medevac, get a trauma team down here now. We have a severely injured Valerian cub and a human in shock." "I'm all right, General," Kendra wheezed, her hands shaking as she tried to unbuckle the damaged exosuit. Mason needs stabilization. His tibias are shattered." When the Valerian medical teams arrived, carrying heavy stasis stretchers, a new problem arose. The pack absolutely refused to let the medics near Mason or Kendra. Every time a medic took a step forward, Finn and Leo bared their teeth, snapping warning bites at the air. "They don't trust them," Kendra observed, her voice weak but steady. "Victor conditioned them to believe that the weak are euthanized. They think the medics are here to finish Mason off." Kendra forced herself to stand, her legs wobbling violently. She reached out, placing a gentle, unarmored hand on Rex's massive forearm. The huge beast instantly calmed, looking down at her. "It's okay," Kendra whispered, looking into Rex's glowing eyes. She pointed to the medics, then to Mason, and gave a firm, reassuring nod. "Let them help. We protect our own. All of our own." Rex studied her face for a long second. He then turned to the pack and let out a short, sharp bark. The wall of fur parted. The medics rushed in, securing Mason onto the stretcher. But the pack made one thing clear. They were not separating. As Mason was wheeled towards the infirmary, the remaining 29 massive cubs fell into a perfect double-column marching formation behind him, with Kendra supported by Rex and Finn in the center. That evening, the political fallout was instantaneous and explosive. Inside the heavily fortified command bunker, General Bradley sat across a polished obsidian table from Commander Vorath and High Counselor Kalen, an elderly Valyrian statesman who had arrived from the capital city via dropship just hours after the incident. "What happened today is a profound cultural disruption," Councillor Kalen rumbled, his grey fur immaculately groomed, his eyes resting on the holographic replay of Kendra lifting the plasteel beam. "Our society has survived for 10,000 years by culling weakness. We are the apex predators of this quadrant. Now, an unarmed human female has shattered our most sacred military doctrine." "With all due respect, Councillor," Bradley countered, leaning forward, "your doctrine is fundamentally flawed. You breed individual warriors, but you do not build soldiers. You build sociopaths who are constantly waiting for the alpha to show weakness so they can strike. Specialist Hayes didn't shatter your military, she evolved it." Vorath steepled his massive clawed fingers. "The General is correct. I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing the ancient texts. Before the Great Orbital Wars, before our society became an industrialized meat grinder, we were true pack hunters. The Prime Alpha was not a tyrant. The Prime was the absolute moral and tactical center of the pack. The Prime ate last. The Prime shielded the young. The Prime led from the front." Vorath pointed a massive finger at the hologram of Kendra. "This human possesses the spirit of the Prime. The cubs sensed it. Their genetic memory awakened." "And what do you propose?" Kalen asked, his tone skeptical. "We cannot have a human commanding a Valyrian heavy infantry unit." "Why not?" Bradley challenged, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "The Coalition Treaty explicitly allows for cross-species officer integration. You want to see what human pack tactics can do for your species? Give Hayes the pack. Let her train them her way. We evaluate them in 6 months against your best blood guards. If they fail, Hayes faces a court-martial for insubordination, and we withdraw our observers. If they succeed, you rewrite your entire military doctrine." Kalen stared at the holographic projection, watching the massive predators shield the tiny, fragile human. "Very well," the councillor agreed. "Let the human forge her vanguard." 6 months later, the copper-tinted sky of Aegis Prime was choked with the exhaust trails of Coalition dropships and Valyrian heavy cruisers. The great proving grounds of the northern wastes, a sprawling, irradiated desert littered with the jagged ruins of a forgotten war, served as the theatre for the most highly anticipated military exercise in a century. Operation Broken Shield was a live-fire tactical war game. The objective was straightforward: capture the central command bunker located deep within the ruins. The defending force consisted of the Valyrian Blood Guards, an elite regiment of 300 fully grown, battle-hardened veterans. They were giants, armoured in heavy plasteel, wielding plasma repeaters and vibroaxes. The attacking force was a single unit consisting of 30 adolescent Valyrians and 1 human. Inside the troop compartment of a tactical insertion craft, Specialist Kendra Hayes, now holding the brevet rank of captain, adjusted the tactical visor of her reinforced combat suit. She was no longer just an observer, she was the Prime. She looked down the bay. Her pack sat in perfect, disciplined silence. They'd grown immensely over the last 6 months, fed on high-density human combat rations and trained under an entirely new philosophy. They wore custom-fitted tactical armour, painted in matte black with a single distinct emblem on their shoulders, a silver wolf howling over a human medical cross. Mason, whose legs had been perfectly reconstructed using human biomechanical engineering, sat near the front checking the power cells on his heavy suppression cannon. Finn, the unit's designated tactical scout, was running diagnostic checks on his helmet's sensory array. Rex, acting as Kendra's heavy enforcer and second-in-command, sat directly beside her, a massive rotary plasma gun resting easily in his lap. "All right, Vanguard," Kendra spoke, her voice transmitting crisply into their earpieces. "The Blood Guards outnumber us 10 to 1. They are bigger, they are older, and they think we are soft because we don't beat each other for sport." A low collective growl of anticipation rumbled through the troop bay. "They fight as individuals," Kendra continued, her tone sharp and authoritative. "They will seek personal glory. They will abandon their wounded to chase a kill. We do not. We move as one, Kendra recited the creed she had drilled into them. We strike as one, the pack answered in unison, their deep voices vibrating against the metal hull. We leave no one behind, Kendra finished. Drop in 30 seconds. The insertion craft banked hard, the rear ramp dropping open to reveal the desolate, windswept ruins below. The Vanguard didn't hesitate. Without waiting for the craft to touch down, the massive cubs leapt from the ramp, using their natural agility and shock-absorbing armor to land flawlessly in the red dust. Kendra followed, her descent slowed by a quick-burst jump pack. The moment they hit the ground, the battlefield erupted. The Blood Guards, entrenched in the high ground of the ruins, unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma fire. The sky turned into a blinding grid of neon blue death. In traditional Valerian warfare, the attacking force would simply charge forward, absorbing the casualties, using the bodies of the fallen as temporary cover until they reach melee range. Kendra's Vanguard did no such thing. Bounding Overwatch, suppressing fire, Kendra ordered. Instantly, the pack split into 3 coordinated squads. Rex's heavy squad dug their claws into the earth, planting their massive rotary cannons and unleashing a literal wall of covering fire that forced the veteran Blood Guards to duck behind their barricades. While the veterans were suppressed, Finn's assault squad flanked to the left, using the rubble for cover, communicating silently through tactical hand signals that Kendra had taught them. They moved with a terrifying synchronized grace that the older, brute force veterans had never witnessed. Up in the orbital observation deck, High Counselor Kalen and General Bradley watched the telemetry feeds on the holographic table. Your veterans are confused, Bradley noted, pointing to the red dots scattering on the map. They expect a frontal assault. They don't know how to handle a coordinated flanking maneuver. Down in the ruins, the Blood Guard commander, a massive brute named Cord, roared a command to push forward. A squad of 10 veterans charged down the rubble, aiming straight for Kendra, recognizing the human as the tactical center of the unit. "Prime in danger," Mason barked over the comms. Instead of scattering, Kendra's unit collapsed inward. Leo and 2 other heavily armored cubs intercepted the charge, locking their shields together to form an impenetrable phalanx. The veterans slammed into the shield wall, swinging their vibro axes wildly. During the clash, a plasma round grazed Leo's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward into the dirt. Cord laughed, expecting the young unit to shatter, expecting them to abandon the wounded cub as Valerian tradition dictated. He raised his axe to deliver a simulated killing blow. But the Vanguard did not abandon their brother. Before Cord could strike, Kendra herself slid beneath the massive veteran's legs, firing a concussive stun round directly into his knee joint. As Cord buckled, Rex vaulted over Kendra, tackling the veteran commander to the ground. Simultaneously, 2 medics from the pack dragged Leo back into cover, immediately applying biofoam to his simulated wound. The Vanguard didn't just hold the line, they systematically dismantled the veteran force. They used overlapping fields of fire, they laid ambushes. When a Vanguard member was pinned, the entire unit shifted to extract them. The Blood Guards, fighting as selfish individuals seeking alpha status, fell apart under the disciplined, unbreakable cohesion of the pack. Within 45 minutes, the impossible happened. The Central Command bunker's heavy blast doors were blown off their hinges. Kendra strode into the control room, flanked by Rex and Finn. Cord, the veteran commander, lay on the floor, his armor covered in simulated kill markers, staring up at the human with a mixture of absolute shock and newfound reverence. Kendra walked over to the primary console, uploaded her command code, and the facility's alarms blared, signaling a total victory for the Vanguard. In the orbital observation deck, the silence was absolute. The Valerian commanders stared at the screens, their worldview irrevocably altered. A unit of adolescents, led by a squishy, weak primate, had just humiliated their most elite fighting force without sustaining a single simulated casualty. Counselor Kalen slowly turned to General Bradley. The elderly statesman's eyes were wide, filled with a sudden, profound understanding of the universe's new reality. "General Bradley," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Humanity did not just bring us medical supplies and trade routes." "No, Counselor," Bradley replied, a proud, stoic expression on his face. "We brought you humanity. You have shown us that empathy is not a weakness," Kalen continued, looking back at the screen where the massive beasts were lifting Kendra onto their shoulders, howling in victory. "It is the ultimate weapon. It binds the pack tighter than fear ever could. Your specialist Hayes has just forged the deadliest military force in the galaxy." Down in the ruins of the proving grounds, Kendra smiled, resting her hand on Rex's head. She had entered the hell of the arena as an observer, an outsider meant to watch a brutal culling. She emerged as a legend. She was the prime of the vanguard, the human who taught the galaxy's most lethal monsters how to truly protect one another. The old ways of fear and betrayal were dead. The era of the pack had begun, and with humanity at the helm, the universe would never be the same. What an incredible journey! If you loved this thrilling sci-fi tale of Kendra Hayes and her fierce, loyal vanguard pack, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow HFY fans. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another epic story where human empathy and resilience outshine alien brutality. We have plenty more amazing galactic adventures coming your way, so join our pack today and stay tuned for more.